Hello and welcome to Freed Indeed Live. This is Caleb's Corner. So Caleb is here with us, and we are doing our Halloween-ish special because, um, at the time of recording this, it's what, like 2 weeks after Halloween. Uh,
Sadly, yeah,
yeah, but
yeah,
for us, it's Halloween all year round because we are horror writers, we're sci-fi writers, we're into everything Halloween, so I feel like it's fair to say that we do Halloween all year round.
yeah. And
So Caleb, we've been talking about monsters, we've been talking about demons, we've been talking about ghosts. What's left to talk about for a Halloween special?
well, I think we have to really couch this into what is Halloween to begin with,
Right.
right? And I think that a lot of our viewers, especially those of us who don't know us very well, might be surprised to find out that we absolutely love Halloween.
Right.
And I think a lot of even Orthodox Christians are surprised to find Orthodox Christians that like Halloween,
Hmm.
especially here in the States, right?
Right.
Or in any kind of Western country, because technically Orthodox Halloween is sometime, I believe, in June, if I'm
Yeah.
not mistaken. I, I always thought we should send the kids trick-or-treating in June on our All Hallows Eve and
Yes.
have Orthodox tracts with like where to find a divine liturgy, so we give them treats. I thought that would be cool.
Right.
Uh, but people would look at us weird, so you know. But if there's one thing I think the West has on us, it's that I think their Halloween is much better.
Yeah.
Not only the time of the year, but just the traditions that have been built up around it. And I think what I want to tell our viewers is like, well, isn't that celebrating demons and evil and all that kind of stuff? And the answer is definitely no.
Right.
Um, but demons, witches, ghosts, goblins, the damned are nonetheless part of Halloween,
Right.
right? And that's going to sound really weird. And I would say Halloween is actually one of the most extremely Christian holidays there is,
Exactly.
surprisingly. And I think to put this in perspective, I heard somebody say this. I don't remember if it was a clergyman or what Orthodox group I was on, but the argument is that Halloween in the West is the European Passover. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So Jews celebrate the Passover as deliverance from the gods of Egypt, right?
Right.
These horrible plagues. I mean, it's pretty brutal when you think about it. Passover is the celebration of the death of the firstborn of Egypt, right?
Yes.
You know, when God's angel of death strikes down the firstborn of
Talk about
Egypt.
spiritual warfare.
Right, in an act of vengeance against those who
Right.
murdered the firstborn of the Hebrews not long before that. And it's not like they weren't given a chance to get away from
Right.
that. You know, for those of you atheists who think, "Well, that was just mean," I'm like, they were warned and they were told how they could escape
Exactly.
it, but they scoffed. You know, um,
And they had 9 plagues before that in
right,
which to repent.
right. And so Halloween in the West, as Jonathan Pajot puts it, is the last true carnival, right?
Hmm.
We've kind of lost the idea of what a carnival is in our modern world, and we think of a carnival as fun games, fun treats, have a nice night sort of thing. And
Right.
that's really not what carnivals are about. Carnivals are, in a way, a reenactment of a chaotic period of time, right?
Right.
So, for example, in a carnival, the rules are supposed to be temporarily suspended for
Hmm.
that night in a controlled way, right?
Right.
So on Halloween, for example, we come out at night instead of the day, right? Everybody
Yeah.
comes out at night. We eat a bunch of candy and treats when we're not supposed to eat a bunch of candy and treats, right?
Right.
We can drink that extra beer or glass of wine or that glass of sake, right? You know,
Exactly.
and you know, we do all the things that we're not quote supposed to do, right?
Right.
And then not only that, but you also have in this part of Halloween people dressed up as monsters,
Right.
and typically now we dress up as superheroes and whatever now, you know, things that are quite benign, really. And that wasn't traditionally the dress for Halloween. You were supposed to dress as a witch, a ghost, a devil, you know, something
Right.
monstrous, right? And it's like, why would you want to do that as a Christian? Well, hang in there. You go to the door and knock, 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 trick or treat. right?
Right.
This is a reenactment of a threat,
Right.
right? Give me a treat or you're going to get a trick, right?
Right.
It used to be, if they didn't give you good candy, you threw eggs at their house, right?
Right.
Or toilet papered their trees, right? And this is supposed to be a reenactment of the
Back when
pagan
eggs and
gods
toilet paper were affordable enough to do that.
and will be soon again.
Yes.
Yes. I won't say anything else, but anyway, um, but yeah, and
Uh,
so this is supposed to be a reenactment of the pagan gods, right? The pagan gods that Western Europeans used to worship, right? And
right.
people think, and the thing is Hollywood's tried to make the gods sanitary, try to make
Right.
them good or loving or
Yeah, it's
something.
funny how Hollywood, for all of their hatred of Christianity, they've really tried to make Zeus look like a Christian.
Well, like Yahweh, right? Like
Exactly.
right. And I mean, if you have watched like the newer what's her name Wonder Woman movie, like the story of Zeus
Yeah.
and Ares is basically God and Satan. I'm like, this is not Greek mythology by a
Right.
long shot,
Exactly.
right? And it's like this is literally Christianizing everything. Uh,
Exactly. And they make the
but
god of war into a bad guy, and it's like, no, dude, the Greeks loved Ares, man.
right, and Athena and all that kind of stuff, right? And well, yeah, Ares let you do what you want in the war. You want to rape that woman, rape that woman. You want to take the
Right.
loot, take the loot. You want to kill all those people, kill all those people, you know? And so the idea here is this is supposed to be a reenactment of what the pagan gods imposed upon their worshippers.
Right.
Give us our sacrifices, humans sometimes, or and we'll leave you alone, right? We
Right.
won't bother you. If we look at like some of the few pagan rituals that got written down and recorded in history, the purpose of that a lot of the times is to keep the gods away, right?
Right.
You only seek their help when you have to. We need to keep them happy so they don't smite us,
Right.
right?
Exactly.
Right. And so this night of Halloween, of course, the jack-o'-lantern, which is kind of a latecomer to Halloween, kind of like the
Right.
Christmas tree is a latecomer to Christmas, right? That there wasn't a Christmas tree really popular until after World War One. The jack-o'-lantern, from what I understand, didn't come around until the 1700s. The story of Stingy Jack from Ireland, really funny
Right.
story, really. And but the idea is that this is supposed to be recreating the world in which the pagan gods were in charge, right? The
Right.
upside down world, right? And so you get this for one night, and then the next day, it's called All Hallows Eve. Eve of what? Right? And it's the eve of All Saints Day.
Right.
The next day, order is restored. Everybody goes in the morning to mass or divine liturgy, and they receive the body and blood of Christ, and the saints are now in focus rather than the monsters and the
Right.
witches and the ghosts and all that kind of stuff. And the idea here is that the saints have now displaced the pagan gods, right? They've been
Exactly.
exorcised by Christ, the conquering king, the God of gods, right? And now we've restored order and things like that. So Halloween's basically a big giant exorcism holiday,
Right.
is what it is. Which brings us to our topic today, exorcisms. How do we get rid of these demons, ghosts, pagan gods, monsters, all that kind of stuff? And that's one of our
Exactly.
kind of the focus of our books, really.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
since we're talking about, so exorcism is, by the way, the pinnacle of what Christians call spiritual warfare. So, spiritual warfare is not some guy yelling at a demon, and spiritual
Praying to the
warfare.
demon.
Right, exactly. That's
That's what they
not
do.
what spiritual warfare is. Spiritual warfare is you're casting out the demon, you're doing battle by the power of God. And actually, when you read the Church Fathers' writings on spiritual warfare, most of it is just pretty basic Christian life stuff. It's like if you want to do spiritual warfare, be a person of prayer. If you want to do spiritual warfare, fast twice a week. If you want to do spiritual warfare, it's like
Go
that's
to
most
confession.
of spirit, right, go to confession. That's most of what spiritual warfare is you're
Hmm.
casting out the sin from your life and you're casting out the demons from your own life, thus preparing yourself to aid others in casting demons out of their own life.
Hmm.
Um, because, Father Stephen DeYoung said something that I really loved. He said, people always ask, like, is this building haunted? Is this place haunted? And my answer is yes, everything is haunted. Like, that's why we need to be constantly vigilant because there is no place that isn't haunted. And even like, yes, we do house blessings and things, and I do believe that that gets rid of these things. But let's be honest, how many of us live completely perfectly throughout the year from house blessing to house blessing? Like,
Never.
never. I haven't had a year yet where I don't even have a sinful thought. Well, the problem is when you do that, you're inviting the presence of evil back into your life when you're doing these sinful things. So that's why we do house blessings every year. It's not a one and done
Right.
deal. And that's why
Hmm.
everything is haunted because everything, every place we go is somewhat tainted by evil and is
Hmm.
also blessed by the good that we do. Both good and evil actually affect the world around us.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and that's most of what spiritual warfare is.
Right.
But we're not really talking about that. What we're
Right.
talking about is when spiritual warfare goes to the next level, right? So,
Right, because I think a lot of people, when they come to Orthodoxy, are surprised how many exorcisms we actually do.
yeah,
Um, because usually most Protestants in America, and some, sadly, probably a lot of Catholics too, think exorcism's a pretty rare thing, right?
right.
But I mean, we do exorcisms at baptisms,
Yep,
right? Um, People are surprised, like, why are you giving me an exorcism? I'm not demon possessed. I'm like, yeah, but you are affected by sin, are you not? And
right?
I've heard some pretty amazing stories of people who were given exorcisms at their baptism, as all Orthodox recipients are, and they said that there are these family curses and things that they'd had that were just lifted in an instant, like things they forgot
Yeah,
they even had. But yeah, the most extreme example we're talking about, which makes its appearance in our books, is when evil starts to manifest itself in some sort of tangible
right.
form, right? And I mean, it's bad enough when people manifest this, right? And of course,
Hmm.
when humans participate in evil, they are participating with demons, with the forces of evil. But sometimes it's there. It gets so bad that the person knows that's what they're
Right,
doing, right? That they're not just acting on their passions that's being tempted by demons and encouraged by demons, which has a lot more, let's say, human agency.
right,
This is where a person has essentially surrendered to the spiritual powers that are acting on them, and then this manifests in a way that's quite terrifying, to say the least.
right.
The one we're thinking about being demonic possession, right?
Hmm.
And so one of the things we often get asked is like, okay, do y'all have um, exorcists in the Orthodox Church? And the answer is yes. But I think
The
what
answer
people
is
don't
kind of.
kind of, yeah. Right. Because when people think of exorcist, they think of the movie The
Right,
Exorcist. They think of the Vatican, who has an exorcism school, right, where
right,
priests are essentially certified and trained to be exorcists. It's a specialized
right.
sort of. They even have lay exorcists in Rome, I found out as well.
Yeah,
And 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 in Orthodoxy, every priest is an exorcist, and I believe
exactly.
some deacons are too. Believe it
Yeah.
or not, some
Hmm.
deacons are ordained as an exorcist. And so and the reason for that, I've had people ask that, like, why is every priest an exorcist? And I say, why wouldn't you want every priest to
Right.
be an exorcist? Why would you want to get into the situation where, um, oh man, he's actually demon possessed, so I got to call up, the MP,
Right.
the EP, the whatever, the
Exactly.
AP, and get a specialized guy from our capital in Constantinople down here. It's like,
Nope.
no, I'd rather just have the priest be like, okay, let's go.
Right,
Um,
exactly.
and that's one very practical reason. Uh, but the other reason is that this is a regular part of the ministry of Christ.
Right.
In any gospel you read,
Yep.
it is a regular part of the apostles' ministry. and
Yes.
it was a regular part of the church fathers' ministry,
Hmm.
right? And so, if you're going to do ministry of any kind, you have to be ready to encounter the demonic in one form or another. But
Exactly.
let's just take an example from the story. So, the story that appears in the gospel of the man possessed with over 1,000 demons, the
Right.
legion demon, right? And we have this story of a man who somehow becomes possessed. We're really not sure how, but he's living in the tombstones. He's naked. He's got broken chains because apparently some people tried to restrain him, and he's been living this way forever. Of course, we know the story. Jesus casts the demons out into a herd of pigs.
Right.
The demons run off a cliff and into the Sea of Gennesaret, where they drown, which is a gateway to the underworld.
Right.
And,
Which, by the way,
and
if you ever
yeah,
want to make your Protestant friends and Protestant pastors super uncomfortable, okay, talk to them about how many times that story references the Book of Jubilees.
yep,
Because
and
that
the Book of
story
Enoch
is
as
like
well. Yeah.
tons of the Book of Jubilees, right from the point where the demon first addresses Christ because he says, "Hast thou come that thou mightest torment me before the time?" Well, what does that mean, before the time? Well, in the Book
Time of
of
what?
Jubilees, in
Yeah.
the Book of Jubilees, there's this well, the Nephilim are getting destroyed, and the leader of the
Hmm.
Nephilim shows up before God and he says, "Hey, we really don't want to go to hell. It sounds like it sucks. Can
Yeah.
you give us the ability to live on earth as unclean spirits? We'll possess people, we'll bother people, we'll do all this stuff."
Only bad people.
Right, but only the bad guys. We promise we won't mess with your people. Um, but we'll mess with everybody else, and then God says, okay, 10% of the Nephilim get to live on as these unclean spirits doing
Hmm.
mischief on earth, and 90% of them straight to hell.
Yeah. Right.
But
Right.
then he says, then here's the thing though. On the last day, on the day of judgment, it's going to be that many times worse for you because
Hmm.
you have been still adding sin to sin this whole time. And uh and God has his own purpose in that. The Book of Jubilees makes it clear that God isn't just doing this for fun. He's doing this because
He's
he's
not
going.
being nice to demons either.
Right. He's
No.
not being nice to the demons. He's going to use them. They mean it for evil, but he's going to use it for good because he's going to lead people to repentance.
Right.
And so
Torment
we
the
see all
evil.
of
Yeah.
these elements in that story. Jesus is using the very possession of this man to lead people to repentance.
Yeah.
And Jesus is also showing that he is God because the demons, they're like, "Hey, you can't do anything to us before the time." And Jesus says, "I can do whatever I want. Get out." And
Right.
then they beg
Right.
him to go into the pigs. And they specifically ask in the Book of Jubilees, one of the reasons why I bring this up as well is, Caleb rightly points out that the pigs run into the abyss, into the sea. Well, what is that? Why? Why do the pigs do that? It's because in the Book of Jubilees, when the Nephilim are being cast into hell, they're cast into hell through a portal type thing that is in the abyss. So they're thrown into the
Hmm.
abyss, and down in the abyss, they encounter hell. Um,
Hmm. Deep,
so
watery places.
Right.
Yeah.
Spiritual geography, right? Which, by the
Right.
way, people, like modern people are always like, "Oh, that's so stupid." And I'm like, "Is it really?" Like, there's tons of we've explored 5% of our ocean, and then we decided to go into space. How terrifying does the ocean have to be for us to be like, we get
Right.
5% of the way in, and then we say, "Yeah, we'd rather explore the void of nothingness
Yeah.
than explore this."
Where no
So,
life is. Yeah. It's like,
right, where
um,
there can be no life. It's like, what did they encounter that was so terrifying
mhm.
underwater that they just abandoned the project completely.
It's like,
Um,
yeah, and you think about the bog sacrifices
yeah,
in Germany and Anglo-Saxony and Ireland, where they threw human sacrifices that have been strangled into bogs, which are
right.
swamps, where they sink down to the bottom. We found those people, that
Yeah,
their remains, right? And it's like, yeah, it's almost a universal belief that the underworld's passages are always found in deep, watery, dark places, right?
exactly.
And so, I mean, any culture, almost any culture
Pan's
whatsoever, you find it.
Grove in
Pan's Grotto, yep,
Mount,
yep.
yeah, Pan's Grotto at Mount Hermon
Which we talked
is
about. See our previous video on
that's
Ozation.
right. See our previous video. That's another place. That's a dark, watery pit.
Right.
And so
And the flood, Noah's flood. It's
it
interesting.
returns
God,
the earth to chaos. Yeah.
right? Which so he turns the whole world into a gate to the underworld, which is the whole point
Right.
of the flood was to get rid of the giants, the Nephilim and their
Right.
fathers, right? And sometimes, yeah, with all this kind of, so with us, we have exorcists everywhere,
Hmm.
whereas Rome has specialized, priests and
Who have
bishops
to
and
get
maybe,
approval and have I mean,
right,
it's just another
very
example of how
scientific.
Rome is a
Yeah.
bureaucracy.
Yeah, and it's very scientific the way
Right.
they approach exorcism. Like first the person has to have a psychiatric evaluation, then the next they have to, and it's like my one problem with this, just to caveat that, is that okay, you could probably measure that a person has psychiatric problems. That does not mean they don't have some sort of demonic problem too.
Exactly.
It's like, see, they try to make it, oh, if they have a psychiatric problem, it means they don't have a demon. I'm like, no, it does not. It
Right.
just means that you can measure some physical way that a demon might be affecting somebody.
Exactly.
It's like,
As if
give that,
demons couldn't
yeah,
possibly give somebody schizophrenia.
or sickness or anything
Right.
like that. And
I mean, in the
sometimes,
gospel, there's that one woman
yes,
who's like
who's hunched
bent
over
over, and it's just
and
like
can't stand up.
the
And
demon
it's
is
like,
just holding her like this. Like,
right,
if
and
a
she's not
demon can
foaming
do
at the
that,
mouth, and she's not, screaming blasphemies. She
right?
just has a simple bad back, and yet Jesus is like, "Oh, she's got a demon." It's like, "Hang on a minute,"
Exactly.
right? So, yeah, I mean, it's just I think it's silly to do that. I'm like, "Okay, address the psychiatric problem and then give them an exorcism anyway."
Right.
It's like, you
Exactly.
know. And the other problem I have,
Everybody
well,
needs an exorcism. We should be like Oprah. You
yes.
get an exorcism. You get an exorcism. Everybody gets an
Yes.
exorcism. Like Oprah without the
Yes.
human trafficking, though.
Oh, yes. And yeah, so it's like that's one problem I have there is just sort of this sort of, very, like you said, bureaucratic, scientific, rationalistic approach to exorcism, which shows up in our book
Right.
because we have a character who are one of our main protagonists is a Dominican monk. Dominicans are
Hmm.
known for their exorcists and their heresy hunters, and he's
Yes.
kind of a catch-all thing. A demon slayer is the word
Right.
used in the medieval period, and
He's
essentially,
basically a witcher.
a Witcher or Van Helsing, right?
Right.
Right. So if you guys are big fans of The Witcher, Van Helsing, or Hellboy, this is all rooted in history. It's all rooted in the medieval demon slayer, and these guys would be sent out by their abbots or their priest or bishop, and they would go deal with either demon possessed people or vampires, werewolves,
Hmm.
things like that, which we talked about monsters before. Go see
That's
our
right.
other video.
Go
Yes,
see our other video.
vampires, werewolves, things like that are a reality, right?
Yes.
And and sometimes these exorcists would be trained fighters, trained warriors, trained killers, if you will, because sometimes a situation was bad enough that it required force of arms,
Right.
right? And we see this, like for example, with some saints in history, like Saint George,
Right.
right?
Hmm.
Killer of dragons, right? Who actually has to use physical means to deal with spiritual entities that have taken some sort of physical form of some kind.
Right.
For example, the one case we talked about in Croatia with the vampire,
Yeah.
right? Again, see our previous video. The priest took a knife and cut the guy's head off,
Yeah.
and then performed the exorcism. Now he was already dead, folks. He was an undead vampire, right?
Right.
But still, very physical thing to do. So this is why I like things like this.
Yes.
So if y'all are curious, this is a medieval mace. So this is made of bronze, made and forged by none other than Todd Cutler, who has a great YouTube
Oh,
channel here
nice.
on YouTube. Yeah, there's his maker's mark right there. I don't know if you could see it, but yeah,
Oh,
there
I
it is.
can. Yeah, that's
Yeah, see it?
awesome.
Yeah, so bronze was really handy for maces because it doesn't rust and you can cast it effectively, and it's a blunt force weapon. But the cool thing about this weapon is you don't have to sharpen it, and it's very easy
Right.
to repair, right? But it's funny because from what some things we could tell in history, monks and priests were real fond of these, by the way. Hence why in Dungeons and Dragons, clerics carry maces, right?
Right.
Uh,
Hmm.
and there's some myth that they like these because they didn't shed blood because they're not edged or sharp, right?
Right.
But I'm like, if you hit somebody in the head hard enough, I mean, you're going to draw blood. But I don't think it had anything to do with that. I think it had to do with the fact that these are very simple and easy to
Right.
use, easy to make weapons, and
You don't really have
um,
to be trained on it either. Like a
no, like it,
swordsman has to train his whole life to be really
right,
truly effective,
and in
but
2 weeks
you
you
can
could be
just
ready to
hand
use
somebody
this.
a
Yeah.
mace.
Yeah, 2 weeks you could be ready to use. I mean, clubs are one of the most, universal weapons on the planet. You'll notice that head's not very big and it only
Right.
weighs a little over, I think a little under a pound. So it's a very effective, very cheap weapon for that. And what do you got there on your lap? I see. You got a
This
weapon
one,
too?
this is my favorite sword, and for
Ooh.
those of you who've read, I haven't published the book yet, but for those of you who've read my little preview of the Undamned, yes, this is what the black sword looks like. It's a short sword, and
Short swords are
basically,
great.
yeah. So this is actually modeled after the real swords that Spartans carried,
The
but it's made with
copiece.
modern metallurgy. Yeah.
Yeah, the
So it
copiece.
is, yes. So it's an awesome weapon. I really love it. I also have a long sword, but it's so big that I can't really fit it on the frame, so I didn't want to get
Hmm.
it out just so that you guys could see basically the hilt.
Right. And
So
our
this is my
yeah.
favorite one.
And our character in our book, who's a Benedictine demon slayer, he's a former crusader, so he knows his way around with a sword. So I'm going to try to show you this one here. Hang on a second. Let me adjust my phone here. I'm sorry, this is a little bit awkward, guys, but this is my pride and joy right here.
Ooh,
Look at that.
nice.
Isn't that
Oh my
pretty?
goodness.
Hang on.
Oh, that's awesome.
What do you think of that?
Oh, that's so awesome. Now that's a Celtic sword.
It's actually French.
Oh, it's actually French. Okay.
Yep. See how it tapers to that point?
Yes.
This was made after King Philip the Fourth's blade was the
Oh
inspiration for this.
my
So
goodness,
it
that's
weighs
awesome.
it weighs just around 2 pounds. So it's pretty
Wow,
light for a
really?
blade. Yeah, but see the bottom. I love this. It's good head knocking
Oh,
hammer.
yes.
I'm also a big like fanboy of brass and bronze, so I love
Yeah,
that kind of stuff on swords. But yeah, this is the scabbard it came with here. But yeah,
that's
so
awesome.
sometimes your demon slayer actually does need physical weapons, and sometimes blessed weapons.
Right. Yes. And
Right.
here's the thing. So sometimes spiritual warfare is also real warfare. And again, somebody might be uncomfortable with that. Well, this is biblical. In the Bible, we see that the Nephilim, part of how they were defeated was the flood and also the Archangel Gabriel turning them against one another in the book of Enoch. But also biblically, we see that after the flood, when God raises up Israel to be a people, he sends them to destroy the Nephilim. And
Canaan.
so, yeah, in Canaan. So. And atheists make a big deal about like, oh, the Israelites killed people. No, the Israelites killed specific people though.
Yes.
Because if
Yeah.
you look at like when the Israelites were sent into Edom, God says you can't kill them and you
You can't
can't
take a
take
foot
their
of their
land.
land. Not a foot of it. Yeah.
Exactly. Don't kill
Nor
them,
the
don't take their
Moabites
land. I
or the
I've given them that.
Ammonites.
Hmm.
Yeah. Yep. He's like,
But then
these are
with the
Abrahamites like you. Yeah.
exactly. But with the Nephilim, wholesale slaughter. Get rid of
Right.
them.
And he
Um,
names what they are, right? He names their
exactly.
tribes. Jebusites, the Amorites, the what is the Amalekites,
Mm-hmm.
the Anakim, the Raphaim,
Mm-hmm.
all those kind of things. And as we've mentioned before, giants don't necessarily need to be people who are 9 foot tall,
Right.
right?
They can
We
be, but they don't have
They
to be.
definitely can be, and we have examples of those kinds of people in the scripture who are quite tall. But of course, demigods like Hercules had incredible strength, incredible
Mm-hmm.
speed, some sort of supernatural abilities that we're not aware of, right?
Right.
And and so, yeah, this is a both a physical and a spiritual type of warfare that required force of arms, right, to get rid
Mm-hmm.
of these monsters. And it's always the hill tribes, right? It's the
Right.
guys which we mentioned in D&D, giants and mythology always live on mountains, and the ones in Canaan are no exception to this.
Right.
I'm going to put one
I
caveat
wonder
here.
if
Yeah,
I wonder if I've always been fascinated by, Appalachia and how
yeah,
they have all this like really in-depth mythology. Appalachia is truly the
creepy.
only like in the United States, I think Appalachia is the only like truly mythological people left.
Oh,
Um,
I'd 100% agree. And this is why Orthodoxy is taking off like crazy in
exactly.
Appalachia. I mean, we've got
Exactly.
Appalachian Orthodox hymns now that
Yes.
have their local
Yes.
bluegrass kind of sound to it. It's beautiful.
It's
Guys,
amazing.
go on YouTube, type in Appalachian Orthodox chant. It's amazing. And
Yes.
there's a whole Appalachian communities that have now become Orthodox communities, like what you
Hmm.
would see in Greece or Romania and
Right.
others like that.
And
It's
of
incredible.
course, I mean, of course, they're the only mythologized people we have. So of course,
Like,
they
oh
hear
yeah,
orthodoxy
monsters
and
are
they're like,
real.
"Psh, this is
Yeah,
it."
yeah.
But I wonder though, they live in these hills.
Yeah,
They live among, and they always talk about how creepy, like you don't whistle at in the woods, you don't go out at night, you don't
right.
respond when
You
things,
don't take the gold from these hills over here because it's
right?
cursed. I've had students
Exactly.
who are from that area tell me about places where there's lots of gold and everybody knows there is, but they said don't ever take it. And they know people who have
Exactly.
died or have had something horrible happen to them because they decided to go gold mining in these areas. And yeah, I think that's right. I think they are truly the last of the only mythological people besides Native Americans
Hmm.
here in the United States. And on a side note, don't you think Native American like shamans, if they converted to Christianity, would make great schema monks? You know,
Yes,
they live in the woods
definitely.
and in caves, and they could be you imagine like them wearing a schema, but then it has antlers on the top, like
Yes,
that
that'd
would
be
be so
amazing.
cool. Oh yeah, we could cultivate that easily,
Oh
but
yeah. I
but
feel like the West has really missed an opportunity with Native Americans. Like I just have to say that. Like the
sadly, yeah,
West totally because the West perceived them as
pagans, heathens,
pagans and
Canaanites,
heathens and then sort of just like
yeah,
aggressively despised them,
hmm
but they completely missed like in Alaska where Orthodoxy found Native
right,
Americans, Orthodoxy found these people and was like, "Hey, this is an awesome culture," and really cultivated it, and you see this
oh yeah,
amazing culture that develops. Or what's happening right now in Appalachia, I think is kind of similar to what happened
yeah.
in Alaska.
And we
Um,
recently canonized a saint who is a Native American, Saint Olga of Alaska,
yes,
right?
that's right.
Right.
In
So,
fact,
yeah,
did you know that the Orthodox Church in America is the only, out of every church that exists in America, it's the only church that the majority of the people who have been canonized are actually natives?
yep, yep. Not even Rome can say that. I know they have
Exactly.
some native saints like Lily of the Mohawks, but it's
Hmm.
like not many. Yeah, and it's always interesting that you hear the stories about the Inuit say that before the Orthodox priests showed up to their shores when the Russians were, that they had these spirits that came into their
Yeah,
camp and that manifested and said, hey, here there's somebody coming to your camp and you need to listen to him.
right.
It's like, and they were like, at first they wanted to worship these beings. They're like, no, do not worship me. It's like,
Right.
it's like you need to listen to these bearded guys when they show up. They're going to show you something amazing. Here's what you can do in the meantime, right?
Right.
And it's like when the Orthodox missionaries showed up, they're like, "We knew you were coming." And it's like,
Exactly.
yeah, so you hear these stories that are completely like peaceful, right?
Hmm.
And you hear about even when like the Russian settlers would try to harm the
Right.
natives, the priests would stand in the way of their guns and their
Exactly.
weapons. And like, you are not going to do anything while I'm standing here. And of course, any Russian worth of salt would know better than to harm a priest, right?
Exactly.
You know, and yeah, so it's amazing stories like that. But yeah, they really did with Puritanism and militant Catholicism really ruin a lot of natives' perception of Orthodoxy and
And it's such
or,
a missed
of Christianity,
opportunity. It's such a missed
right?
opportunity because Native Americans actually, like you said, there's so much in Native culture that could have been cultivated in a very Christian way.
Right,
Um, and it
right.
just
And of
wasn't
course,
because they
and
just showed
in the
up with
modern
like this
period,
weird hatred.
and the modern period had that growing sense of racism,
Yeah,
which had never existed in the world before, right?
right,
And which didn't happen in the East, right?
right,
Was actually condemned in the early modern period,
right.
right? Whereas over in the States, this idea, oh, these are, with the polygenism, these are a
Hmm.
different type of people. And you had people say, oh, these people are from Cain's line,
Right,
right? You get that with Mormonism, for example. But
right.
it existed in some Puritan strains too.
Yeah.
But yeah, and to get back to the whole idea about oh, I'm sorry, I thought I had an incoming call. I had to stop it.
No, you're good.
But to get back to the whole conquest of Canaan, I wanted to caveat something in case the atheists are watching.
Yeah,
I'm sure they are. They love to interpret this as well. They just said they were giants to demonize these people so that
right,
they could kill them and take their stuff and all that kind of stuff. I'm like, yeah, except here's one real big problem. Well, first of all, they are demonized in the
right.
way that, yeah. But second of
They
all, I'm like, you're
demonized themselves long before the Jews showed
for
up.
400 years, right? And so the other problem is that you can't really call it genocide because the Canaanites and the Hebrews are from the same bloodline. They're
That's
like
right.
cousins.
Hmm.
Hebrews, Babylonians, Sumerians, and Assyrians are all like first cousins. They have the
Yep.
same kind of language, same kind of culture. So it's not really, you can't say it's genocide. The other thing, it's like, what stuff did they take? It's like
Right.
when they conquer a city from these people, God says you have to torch it.
Right.
Everything. You have to burn their house. You have to burn their crops. You have to kill every single bit of livestock they have. And you have to take, and the only thing that they could even take after this would be the gold and silver after it's been burned. And then, even then, they don't get to keep it.
Right. They
They
have
have
to
to
give it to
use
the
it to
temple.
they have to use it to build the articles for the temple. And what's the priest going to do with it? He's not going to sell it. He doesn't even
Right.
get an inheritance.
Right.
The priest doesn't even get to an inheritance. He
Nope.
relies on the tithes that people bring.
Exactly.
It's like so what exactly are you saying? And we do have instances of people trying to take stuff
Yeah, like King
from the city.
Saul.
And Achan,
Yeah, and Achan.
right, who gets
And he
done
was
blood.
really Achan after that.
I love that his name means troubled,
I know.
right?
It's
Right.
just like,
It's like, and
well,
Joshua
that
says,
fits.
you have troubled us, and the Lord shall trouble you this day, right? And which I think is so funny. But yeah, it's like, yeah, so that sometimes exorcism and the expelling of demons does take on a very physical
Hmm.
means of needing to do that. And the conquest of Canaan is that exactly. We also have some instances like this, even in the New Testament, but not exactly a wide scale warfare.
Right.
For example, we have Simon the Sorcerer,
Right.
which I would argue witches are kind of a monster in some ways,
Yes.
right?
Absolutely.
Sort of a self-made Nephilim, right?
Right.
Self-made, right?
Well,
So they're not
sorcerers
born.
are just wizards without hats, right? So,
Yeah, D&D, they're born with that ability. That's probably my favorite class to play in D&D.
yeah.
But yeah, so you have like Simon the Sorcerer who he got baptized, right? He
Yeah.
became
Hmm.
outwardly at least a Christian, and then he's seeing the apostles laying hands on people and says, I want what you have,
Right. I'll
right?
pay this.
I'll pay for this. And then Peter's like, your money perish with you. He said, and
Right.
didn't he say for a time you shall be blind and be led
Yeah.
about by the hand? And he
And he
strikes the
was.
guy blind, right, for like 3 days or something like that. And it's amazing. So even then, it's not just a matter, oh, let me pray for you that you
Right.
have understanding. It's like, no, you need to lose your sight for a few days, right? You even have Saint Philip, for example, who goes to the oracle at Delphi in
Right.
Greece. You know that story? It's pretty good.
Yeah.
He finds the Pythian dragon that lives there, this
Right.
spirit that lives there that takes the form of a dragon and is supposedly the source of power for all these oracles, which guys, women oracles were slaves. They
Mm-hmm.
were not willingly there. They were
Right.
bought and then possessed with this spirit that lived there.
Which,
And they
by the way,
used
that's the
psychedelics to do it.
context behind that whole scene where Saint Paul is in, I can't remember where he
Yep.
is, but then the Oracle comes and she starts talking
Fortune teller.
about, yeah, she's like, this is a man of God, this is a man of God. And Paul turns around and he's like, get out of this woman,
Yeah,
Python
shut
spirit.
up, leave. Yeah,
And
exactly.
and then it does. And then the people who owned her because she's a slave show up and they're like, "Hey, dude, you're cutting into our profit margin. Kick this guy out of town." And it's like they're so
Yeah.
mad. But that's the thing is that these women were slaves. They were forced to do rituals that left them possessed. They usually were sexually abused
Oh,
regularly.
yeah. Yeah.
Um
And they use psychedelics to do this,
Yes,
especially
and
at
that's the
Delphi.
other thing. So
Right.
they
And
were forced to take psychedelics too. So it's not like,
right.
their lives were hell. Like
Right.
like
And
their lives
so
were hell.
and before yeah, literally. And before anybody tells me, "Oh, then they weren't possessed, it was just psychedelics." Okay, hang on a minute here. The Greeks knew what psychedelics were. They
Right.
understood what drugs were. We have writings from Roman doctors who prescribed hemp, cannabis, you
Right.
know, to people, and they note how addictive the stuff is. Yes, it's addictive.
Right.
Um, and
There's a reason you're not allowed to do it in Orthodoxy.
Right. And and the it's funny because the idea is that psychedelics lowered the defenses of your
Right.
mind, right? Because the idea is that a demon can't get possession of you so long as your faculties are in check that don't allow them
Right.
in to some way. You've often heard the phrase "don't get the devil a foothold." This is kind of
Right.
where it comes from. So the idea is if you let your guard down long enough and low enough, you give the demonic access to your body. It's
Right.
not that, oh, the psychedelics made him have visions. I'm like, kind of hard to say whenever they have accurate
Right.
predictions about things that happen,
That's
right?
one thing. The other
Um,
thing is, okay, psychedelics were making them have visions. Fine.
hmm
You can actually, there are several very well documented studies that have shown that even in our own day, there are
hmm
certain things that people who regularly do LSD, even to some
PCP,
degree, yeah,
mushrooms. Yeah,
mushrooms, there are some things that are consistently across the board
the
seen by
same.
people who do these things a lot. So one of them, one of the most famous ones, it's been made famous by who's the guy who looks like Conan? He does a podcast and he's bald. Uh,
Joe Rogan.
Joe Rogan, thank you. The one of them that was popularized by Joe Rogan is the Clockwork Elves. Well, what are the
hmm
Clockwork Elves? Well, consistently across the board, people talk
hmm
about encountering these entities that
That are pleasant at first.
that are pleasant at first, but that ultimately
hmm
demonstrate just absolute hatred towards you.
hmm
They are
Consistently
malicious. They
manipulative.
manipulate you. They teach you really weird stuff. And so I have a friend, he's come into the church now, but before he came into the church, he did spend some time in the psychedelic culture, And he said that one
Right.
of the things that was so fascinating to him is
Right.
everyone who stays in this culture for a long time
Right.
develops the same worldview, the same ideologies, oh,
Hmm.
we're all like brothers and like you and me are really just a continuation of each other. And it's like, but they all have these ideas and they all claim to be getting them from these entities they encounter on their acid trips.
Yeah.
So, okay, you're saying that psychedelics are causing these things, but if psychedelics are causing these things and therefore the argument is therefore it's not spiritual, then how come everybody does, why is it that like if I do these things, I'm a very conservative person, why aren't the entities I'm encountering super conservative? Why do the
Right.
entities I
If they're a projection
encounter
of me, it should be like me. Right.
exactly, if it's just a
Right.
projection of me, it should be
It
like
should
me.
be
Why is it
nonsensical, right? It should
exactly,
be
why is it
nonsense.
changing
Right.
me to become more like them? It doesn't make any
Yeah.
sense unless
Yeah.
it's real. If it's
Right.
real, if these
Right.
things are causing us to have real experiences, then it makes sense that everybody's experience is relatively the
Right.
same.
Right.
Um,
And
and they
Lovecraft wrote
are.
a story like this, remember?
What's that?
Remember Lovecraft's story about psychedelics? Remember that
Yes.
one?
Oh, dude, I
Yeah. I can't remember the
forgot.
name of that story, but man, it was good. And it had a lot
Oh
of
yeah.
stuff like that. But yeah, and just a disclaimer, folks, I'm not saying that, oh, oh, so you're against like soldiers who have PTSD being able to be treated by a medical professional in micro dosages of shrooms or whatever to help them. No, I'm not saying
Hypnos.
that.
That's the name of the
No.
story.
Hypnos, yes, Lord Hypnos, yes. And it's like, no, I'm not saying that at all. I'm just
Right.
saying there's a difference between drug seeking like a higher experience, an
Right.
altered state with drugs in order to meet something or someone
Right.
versus seeking medical help. I mean, because codeine, which your doctor gives you,
Right.
right, is a type of cocaine, right?
Right.
It's just a small enough dosage to address your problem,
Right.
right? Because like I'm going to be really controversial here because I won't stay on this subject too long, but I think that medical marijuana can be helpful if you have a doctor
Hmm.
overseeing what you're doing, but I'm not in favor of recreational at all.
Right.
And I think that big pharma is trying to suppress a lot of that because I think a lot of them are killing us with their drugs, right?
Right.
Which are way more
Exactly.
dangerous. But yeah, guys, don't do psychedelics to try to contact something or whatever.
Right.
There's a lot better ways to get where you need to be, but yeah, and sometimes,
Use the Jesus prayer to have spiritual experiences.
yes, burn some incense, meditate, do things that are healthy for you, right?
Right.
And go to divine liturgy for God's sake. Literally,
Yes.
for God's sake, go to the
Yes.
divine liturgy, right? Um, but yeah, the physical aspects of exorcisms cannot be overlooked. I mean, even I've read
Right.
some accounts where, for example, the was it the young man and the gurus about
Yeah. Hmm.
Elder Paisios, the young man and the gurus, a story about a Greek Orthodox Christian who was born so, but wanted to experience what the yogis were doing over in
Right.
India and Hinduism, and got demon possessed by one of these things. They had to hold this guy down when they gave him an exorcism. So
Yeah.
there is a very physical aspect to it. The two are intertwined with one another, so we can't completely rule this out.
Right.
Whenever it's not just some sort of battle of wits, like a battle of intellects, right? And that's
Right.
another thing that I have a huge problem with, which we bring up sometimes in the story, is that one of the things that Rome does that really bothers us is they talk to demons.
Yes.
Okay. And Pentecostals do this.
Right.
Okay. Right. And it's like one of the things the Desert Fathers tell us is that when you're being tormented by demons, or if a demon happens to speak to you, do not talk to it.
Right. You
Right.
do the sign of the cross and you get out of there.
Right. You do not acknowledge the presence of these things. Right. You are supposed to pray meditate, particularly the Psalms. In
Hmm.
other words, talk to the Lord, talk to
Yes.
Theotokos, talk to the saints. Do not have a conversation with a demon, right?
Right.
Because a demon is going to use that opportunity for you to break your concentration of
Right.
Christ so that they can get a full foothold in you.
I
Because
mean, think about it.
eventually,
The very first sin that ever happened, the very first thing that ever went wrong in our world
hmm
started because we decided to talk to a demon,
yep, Adam
specifically
and Eve,
Eve.
yeah.
Eve
hmm
Eve could have just turned around and walked
Adam, we
away.
need to go.
Yeah.
Yeah. Adam could have intervened
Yeah,
too.
Adam, that's another thing too. That's actually a bigger one to me because it says
Back off, scale face.
exactly. He could have just been like, "Get out of here, man." Like,
Yeah, yeah,
like,
yeah.
um,
Yeah.
there was no reason why there needed to be this like dialogue, and
No.
we're gonna have a whole conversation about theology, and he's like, "Oh, but what about this and what about that?" Like, why are you interacting with this thing? Just be like, "Psh, get
Right.
out of here."
Yeah. And it's like well, you have the Roman exorcists in movies where they ask the demon its name, I need to know your name. And there's this sort of I want to say I'm going to try to be nice here, but I really do think that's a superstition. The
Yeah,
idea that if you know the demon's name, you know
right.
its function, and you know how to, and you can control it. I don't think so.
It
I
is
don't
a
think so.
superstition. You know where that comes from? It actually comes from the Key of Solomon.
I was about to say, does it come from the Key of Solomon?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure
I was
it
about to say,
does. That's the most
yeah,
ancient document I've ever seen that has
right.
this idea of knowing the demons' names. For those of you who don't know, the Key of Solomon is, we talked a few weeks ago, Caleb and I, or maybe even a couple months ago now, Caleb and I talked about the fact that in Orthodoxy we have some books that you read in church, some books you read at home, and then there's some books that you really don't read. Key of
At all.
Solomon is one of those books that you really probably shouldn't read at all.
It's a grimoire. It's
Yeah,
a magical text, right?
right.
You don't read books on sorcery, right?
But
And
for those who have
yeah,
read it, it's a super weird book where basically Solomon discovers that he can control demons, so he makes them build things for
the
him.
temple.
And yeah, he
Yeah,
makes them build the temple, he makes them
he uses
build.
a ring, doesn't he, with a
He does.
pentagram
He
or
has
a
one
six
ring
pointed
to
star?
control them all.
Wasn't it wasn't it Raphael, the angel Raphael, who gave that to him?
Yeah.
Which yeah, which
And the
actually
rule is that he can control them as long as he knows their name and doesn't sin. So then the demons figure out that they can
they have to
so
tempt
they
him
have
and jinn show up in the
yeah, and
story too.
Jinn show up. Yes, because the
Right.
Jinn are the ones who end up screwing him over. Because the Jinn make a beautiful woman pass before him, and then when he lusts
Oh,
after
that's
her,
very
he
typically
loses
Solomon. Yeah.
control over all
Yeah.
of the demons.
Yeah, which I'll admit that does show up in one point in our book, the
Right.
the King of Solomon stuff. But
Yes.
it's
But we
guys,
don't
it's fantastic.
recommend it. We're not recommending it.
No, no, it's an interesting book, but don't try anything in it. It's just, but and I'm not saying and even then let's just say it's true.
Right.
Let's just say Solomon did do that. Okay. Solomon was also meeting with an archangel who came from
Right.
God's lips to his
Mm-hmm.
ears. It's like, who are you?
Right.
Right? And it's like, well, and I've heard people say, well, Jesus asked the names of demons. Jesus is God.
Right.
He's not casting them out in the name of Yahweh. He is Yahweh of
Right.
hosts, right?
He's
It's like,
Jesus doesn't need to cast them out in somebody else's name. In fact, even um this was one thing that was really interesting to me is even when we see like the Archangel Michael in the book of Jude, he says the Lord rebuke you to Satan.
right,
But Jesus doesn't do anything like that. When Jesus encounters the
right.
demons, he's just like, "Psh, get out." Like
Or
he doesn't need
sickness.
to rely
Get
on
out.
another name. He has his
Leave.
own name.
Yeah,
Um,
and I've
to
seen
cast
some
out.
movies really botch this. Like there was a film called Judas, which was like a
Oh my
Hallmark
goodness.
movie. It's actually not a half bad film. It did
Right.
some justice. It was made by Catholics, and But it's funny when Jesus heals people, he says, "In the name of my Father, get up." I was like,
Oh,
I was like, huh? I was like, I mean, okay, I get he doesn't do anything except by the will of his
right,
Father in heaven, but to me, that really diminished who he was a
right.
bit. Like that,
Absolutely.
and the other thing, I don't recommend this movie either. You know the one I'm about to say, Last Temptation of Christ,
Oh
uh,
my goodness.
which is total blasphemy. It's a Nestorian Jesus. Yes, it's a Nestorian take on Jesus. Um, he when he raises people from the dead or heals people, he says, "In the name of God and the prophets."
Oh my goodness.
I'm like, what? It's like, what? Yeah, I'm like, oh man. I said, now I might say that.
Right.
A, a priest or a bishop might say something like,
Absolutely. But that's because we don't in
I'm
but
not the son of God.
right. I don't well, and that gets to your point actually is that Jesus can interact with the demons
Right.
because in fact, actually, now that I think about it, Jesus doesn't start conversations with demons. He's not going up and being like, "Hey, what's your name?" No, Jesus shows up and the demons come to him and they're like, "Please don't hurt us."
Or like, or we know who you are, you
Right,
know?
exactly. We know who you
He,
are. Please
he
don't
tells
hurt
one to
us.
shut up at one point. He says,
Yeah,
shut up,
he
get out.
does. He's
Because he
like,
doesn't
yeah,
want people to
just
know who he is. Right.
he's
Yeah.
like, yeah, no, people aren't ready for that yet. Get out and don't come back. Don't let the
Right.
door hit you where the good Lord split you.
If you even have a split as a demon, but yeah.
Yeah, we don't
Uh,
know. We don't need to know.
no. And you know, and
Hecubi
that's the
probably
thing.
do, but
Yeah, but but
sorry.
yeah, that's why I think it's funny in medieval art. You'll see like the devil. He has like a face on his ass. You know, it's like
Yeah.
it's true. It's true. I've seen a couple like that. I'm like, huh? And like the tail is his nose, and it's like the mouth is the butt crack, and it's like, oh my gosh, like somebody was having a laugh with this for sure. But but yeah, it's like no, talking to demons is not part of exorcism.
Right.
And when even the simplest exorcisms I've seen, house blessings, baptisms,
Right.
things like that, the exorcism is always addressed to God and
Hmm.
to the saints and to the Theotokos, and it's always prayers of intercession, asking the saints to
Right.
intercede, and then pleading for the mercy of God to cast out this demon. It's
Right.
funny that the priest also, and this is another big difference between Roman Catholic and Orthodox sacraments, is that the priest will say, for example, in confession, "I forgive you," or "Te
Right.
absolvo" in Latin, right? He'll say, "I baptize you,"
Right.
and then and Protestants do that too. I also
Yeah,
remind you, right?
that's right.
Um, you know, by the power vested in me by God, I pronounce you man and wife, right?
Right.
Whereas in Orthodoxy, this kind of language is avoided,
Right.
right? It's like, and of course, in Roman Catholic exorcisms, I command you to leave in the name
Right.
of Christ, right? And to me, and I'm not trying, I mean, there's been some amazing Catholic exorcists. I'm not trying
Yes.
to knock anything they've done. You know, God bless them. I don't have the courage to do what they do. But to me, this is opening the door for pride,
Right.
for arrogance to seep in, right? It's really to me putting yourself in danger to
Yes.
because the most
Absolutely.
dangerous sin in the world is pride. Like everything is born out of pride, right?
Exactly.
And that's what I love about priests. Like I'm going to confession this afternoon, is like when the priest is done offering me my advice, he says, as God forgave David through Nathan the prophet, I pronounce you, forgiven in the name of Christ.
Exactly.
But before that, he says, be aware you confess not to me, but to Christ our Lord. Tell me what it is you have to confess. In other words, he's like, I'm just here as a witness, right?
Right.
And
Exactly.
then when a person is baptized, he doesn't say, I baptize you. He says, the child of God, the handmaiden of God, the servant of God, depending on who's getting baptized,
Right.
is baptized in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. So
Exactly.
it's always emphasizing that this is a work of God.
Exactly.
Mankind is merely the tool or the weapon, in the case may be.
Right.
to fight back against the forces of evil. I believe marriage is the same way
Yep.
too,
Hmm.
right? And
Yeah,
when the sacrament is handed out, right, or spooned out, I should say, the priest says, calls upon the Holy Spirit to
that's right.
change the elements. It's not by the authority invested in me by
I mean,
whatever. I'm not
even in
sure.
our
Yeah,
individual partaking of the Eucharist, it's like the servant of God, Nicholas, is given it's not I give
precious
you,
body
it's
and blood
it
receives the precious. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, that's right. That's the wording. The servant of God, Nicholas, receives the precious body and blood of Christ. So, yeah,
yeah,
you're absolutely right. It's like in Orthodoxy, there's a lot to safeguard this idea that like yes, we need the priest, but the
yeah.
priest is there to represent us to God and God to us. He's not there of his own authority. Um,
Right,
and
right,
it's interesting. I think that the reason why that changed in the West is because the West places so much emphasis on the idea of authority. So it's like their
right.
whole schism is because of following the Pope and his authority rather
Hmm.
than following God and the whole church and the
Right,
authority of that. And then Martin
right.
Luther comes along and it's like, I have the authority to interpret the Bible however I want to, and the Bible alone and whatever.
And then
Um,
Calvin, and then Zwingli, and then
right,
Cranmer, and then
exactly.
Caspar von Schweckfield, and the Schleitheim Confession, and
40,000
Michael
churches later.
Sattler. Yeah, and that's no exaggeration. I know people, even Orthodox Christians, have said to me, "Oh, there's not that many." I'm like, "Yes, there is.
Yes, there
Yes, there
is.
is.
If
Yes,
anything,
there
that's a
is. I've looked into
conservative
it.
estimate.
It really is. It really is. Yeah, it absolutely is. So, yeah, I think that the important takeaway from all of this is that one, we need exorcists, and
Hmm.
we need to, especially as Orthodox Christians, realize that we have a part to play in
Yes,
exorcism. The Great Commission itself is an exorcism,
that's right.
right? It's a
That's right.
worldwide exorcism. It's not a peaceful call to be nice and tell people Jesus died for them.
Right.
It's a worldwide expulsion of demons from the world,
Exactly.
right? To identify the world, not identify the
Exactly.
world, to make the world like Eden and beyond that,
Right.
right? And not only that, but I just think that also not to be afraid when demons start to manifest physically. Like
Right.
I have friends right now that are being attacked physically by
Hmm.
demons, that
For
things are
sure.
getting knocked over in their houses. They're having nightmares that make them thrash about in bed in the middle of the night. Sometimes force of arms is needed.
Right.
you know,
Hmm.
sometimes we need that person with the sword or the mace or or just
That's
a
right.
good strong arm, as the case may be. But
Like
above
Beowulf.
all, oh yeah, yeah, absolutely, yeah, um, but also to realize that you know, exorcism is a normal part of what we do,
That's right.
right? It's not a strange thing that comes about only in the worst of cases.
Right.
It is a normal part of being a Christian in your everyday life, whether you realize it or not.
Exactly. Exactly. And I think that's so important because, like, every day we are called upon to act as exorcists. We're called upon to live our lives in such a way that we are fighting spiritual warfare every moment of every day.
Mhm.
And, this is one of the reasons why God calls us to synergy. I believe the doctrine of synergy is so important because if the Christian life was just about us becoming morally better people,
Hmm.
God could just do that. God could just, I mean, he already changes our heart at baptism and everything, so he could just zap us and make it so that we never sinned again. But that would
Hmm.
completely miss the point because the point is the battle. The point isn't just for us to never sin again. The point is for us to battle against sin
Struggle.
and
Yeah.
struggle and fight and be warriors so that we're ridding ourselves of these passions. We're ridding ourselves of the demonic influence in our lives. We're, you know, this is why God doesn't just, you get baptized and then zap, you're never gonna desire porn again. For some people, that is how it works, but for most people, that's not how it works. For most people, it's like, I have to struggle. I have to consciously choose on a
Hmm.
daily basis, I'm not going to do this, and I have to commit to that and actually live that way. And that's how we win the battle of spiritual warfare.
Yep.
And, going back to the thing about psychedelics and marijuana and all of that is incorporated as well. Us avoiding those things, or even finding proper uses for these things, because remember, everything that the demons give us is something that God would have eventually shown us a proper use for, um,
Hmm.
a la the Book of Enoch. But it's like that. Even just doing the right science to find proper uses for these things, but in the meantime not using them in stupid ways, even
Hmm.
that is an act of spiritual warfare. You're choosing not to give yourself over to the demonic. You're choosing not to give yourself these effects. You're choosing not to give yourself this harm. And
Hmm.
it's really important that we understand that our lives are lived in a constant struggle and in a constant battle between ourselves and the demonic realm. Um,
Yep.
I will make one caveat with that though, because for those who have studied Zoroastrianism, I
Hmm.
know that some of the stuff I just said might sound a little bit like the Zoroastrian thing. It isn't. And the reason it
Hmm.
isn't is because we don't believe we affect the outcome ultimately. The outcome is already set. Jesus has already won. He's already conquered. He's already
We're the
defeated
mop-up
the
crew.
enemy. Exactly. We're the
That's what.
mop-up crew.
Yeah. And for those of you who
So,
aren't in the military, let me give you what that means. I mean, I'm not in the military, but my buddy Billy is a Marine, and
Semper
a
Fi.
mop, right? So a mop-up crew means that you've already come in and cleaned house with the enemy. But then there's these little groups of scattered armies left over that are over here, over
Hmm.
there, and everywhere. And so rather than sending like your special ops guys who, have already done everything, you send in, what you would call your light infantry
Right.
to move real fast and just kind of find out where these little holdouts are and just get rid of them, right?
Right.
That's what we're doing with the Great Commission. Christ defeated the powers of darkness at the cross and in Tartarus or in Hades when he
Exactly.
kicked in the doors to the underworld, right? And now only thing that's left are these scattered little petty I don't know, I wouldn't even call them governments. Let's say petty little demon gangs, right?
Right.
That are the leftovers of the armies of darkness. And this is our task. We're here to
Exactly.
mop them up. The outcome's done. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yep.
So always think about it in terms of that. And yes, there will come a day when Antichrist will emerge and all of that. But even that, like, the Antichrist is a defeated foe. And it's gonna suck to have to live under the globalized, reign of Antichrist or whatever. That's gonna be miserable for everyone. But it doesn't change the fact that he's already been defeated. Uh, he's not something we have to be afraid of. Death is
Yep.
overcome. Even if we face martyrdom, death is overcome. Death is overthrown. We don't have to be afraid. Um,
Hmm.
because the worst they can do is kill our bodies, and after that, there's nothing they have left, and we still have eternity. So it's nothing to be afraid of. So Caleb is exactly right. We're just a mop-up crew. We're wiping out the little demon gangs that pop up here and there, but Christ is the one who has conquered. So that's very different from. I think I would actually say it's different, but it's also the fulfillment. Like if you're a Zoroastrian watching,
Hmm.
um, I hope that you'll come to the Divine Liturgy and see. I believe that we have the
Absolutely.
fullness of what you're looking for in Zoroastrianism. We have the
Hmm.
fullness of that in Orthodoxy. So come on home and come to the church.
Yep. See the real fire god,
That's right. Exactly.
the
Yes.
all-consuming fire.
And the real thunder god too.
That too. That too.
The one who rides on the clouds.
Exactly.
All right.
Exactly.
Well,
All right, guys.
Caleb, do you have any other closing thoughts you want to share?
Um, well, one few things. If you're wondering where the heck is our book right now?
Yeah.
So I recently had our last, um, I think maybe our last reader finish it. I'm putting together a glossary. That was one of the things our reader suggested. There's a lot of terminology that people who maybe aren't familiar with medieval history or orthodoxy may not understand.
Yeah.
So I'm putting that together, kind of thinking about words I've used in there that I don't really explain and sort of just expect you to know. So I'm putting that together a little bit at a time. I think my wife is still reading this,
Yeah.
and then she really. I haven't asked you this, Kevin, but maybe I should just go ahead and put it out there. My wife wants to do the artwork for it,
Oh,
possibly.
yeah, that'd
My
be
wife
awesome.
paints, so I
Yeah,
said
that'd
you
be
got to
so
read
awesome.
it. I said you got to read it in order to,
Yes.
so it's like you got to read it, in order to do that. So that might be something to do. So with any luck, sometime next year we'll have this first book done because I want it to be good for you guys. I don't like
Yeah,
half-baked things. I really don't.
exactly.
So
No, I think this will be great. So, yeah, no, that's awesome. So, and definitely I love the idea of your wife doing the artwork. That's awesome.
cool.
Um, yeah. Okay. Well, thank you guys for watching and God bless. Get out there and do some spiritual warfare today. If you haven't already, say your
Yep.
prayers, and kick back those demons. God bless.